I don't see me in there.
I wish we had a chalkboard like we did last time, but I always have to make some motions. Yeah. First thing I want to do is review a little bit about what we talked about for Howard's benefit, and just to reinforce some things. Quite a few things that we mentioned that we were going to talk about in detail this time around. First thing that we mentioned was that we were going to be discussing quite a bit about the difference between philosophy and application, and how as an instructor you need to understand more about the philosophy in addition to the application, so that as you work with application and technique, you can make sure, one, that it follows the philosophy that we've established, and two, if you understand the philosophy, you'll be able to come up with your own techniques and applications for the rest of your life. We mentioned something about voice control as far as an instructor goes, breathing exercise, breath control, teaching it, understanding it, attitudes in the sense of asking the right questions to keep everybody in the right frame of mind, and also attitude as far as a person being too much involved with what they're doing and placing too much importance on the outcome. Therefore, they end up not being able to accomplish anything. Encouragement, how much encouragement you want to give, when to give encouragement, and when to cut down. Visualization skills, that we're going to go into a little bit more today. Sound, understanding the sound of one hand clapping, that philosophy we're going to go into more. We mentioned about our mottos and how certain things you say over and over and over again, and they are to some degree mottos of a soma. Our allies, which we're going to talk a little bit more about today, which are gravity, momentum, and centrifugal force. The attitude of water, and how even though we work toward developing the 5 elements, we are constantly wanting our students and ourselves to become more and more like water. So we'll probably go into that in a little bit more detail. The reason for pulls, and mentioning pulls more frequently. Timing, yin and yang, the 5 modes of execution, how virtually all these things relate to forms, techniques, and sparring, and also the philosophy of the body accepts the responsibility for its own actions so that the mind can deal with strategies and circumstances beyond your control. Any questions before we go further? We talked about, to some degree, most of those. We work probably a little over 3 hours. 2 hours of it is on the tape. The rest of it are things that we touched on in reference to forms, techniques, and sparring. And we will be going into all those a little bit more detail today. The philosophy of it more than anything else. Now, before I get started, does anybody have any questions about the things that we went over? I know that you had time to think about these, even though you haven't had a tape to look at what we went over again. But in reference to anything that we went over in class and or the tape that you've been listening to, and I hope you've listened to it several times, those of you who had something to listen to it with. Any comments or questions?
None other than it's a very good tape.
Okay. The tape on the power of questions by Anthony Robbins is probably one of the best organized examples of what we have strived for in martial arts all our lives. When we first started the Wushu Awareness Center, the reason that we came up for the name Wushu Awareness Center was that we wanted it to have a name that signified that it was a martial arts club, and above that, we wanted people to understand and have, as part of their lingo, awareness. Awareness to us is the same as focus is on the tape, meaning that your reality is based on what you're aware of, where he says your reality is based on what you're focused on. So there's not a lot of difference between how we've been assimilating attitudes in martial arts through a soma and what he has on the tape, except that he has it in a very good systematic formula that if you practice it, it's very easy for you to put it into application, and it's very easy for you to assimilate it in a fashion that you can share it with somebody else. I only wish that I could come up with it myself. But use it. Get accustomed to it. As he mentioned in there, get accustomed to sharing your questions. Make it a point every week or every day to ask somebody else a good question and see if you can change things for them. Okay. Voice control, I think we covered that pretty well. Breath control, I think we covered that. Any questions on breathing? Breath control. It will be mentioned a few times throughout the course in conjunction with some other things. Attitude. I did want to clarify a couple of things. We talked about somebody really putting too much emphasis upon what they're doing. There are times when that can be advantageous. There are times when you want a person to put a tremendous amount of importance on the outcome of something. And life is a balance. And what we do in martial arts is a balance. The yin-yang is a balance. Everything that we do is based on balance. Balance meaning a little bit of this, a little bit of that, making sure that it's constantly flowing back and forth. Not one-sided. So it's not like you're going to always be talking to people and say that don't put too much importance on the outcome of what you're doing, or you're going to end up too tense and not be able to accomplish anything. One of the things that we're going to talk about today is commitments in reforms and techniques and how to commit yourself. And in those particular circumstances, you've got to put a lot of importance on the outcome. You can't just say that it doesn't matter like a lot of other things. At that particular point in time, you've got to act as though your life depends upon it. Now, the hard part is that in our society, we cannot put people in a situation or force them into an environment where that they really think that their life is dependent on it. Whereas in past societies, that has been a necessary part of martial arts. One of the things about Don Juan's teachings and Carlos Castaneda's books that made him become what he was, Carlos, was that he was constantly put in a situation where, as far as he knew, he had to do or die. And there was no question about it. If he did not succeed, he would die. Even though most of the time that was not real. It didn't matter. As long as he was focused on that and was aware that that's what he thought and that's his reality. Because your perception is your reality. So anytime that you can get your students and put them into a situation where they can perceive something to be in such a way that it's going to make them progress, then try to get that perception to them. Because as far as they're concerned, that's going to be real. And that plays a big role in being committed to your techniques or committed to sparring. So in attitudes, it does go both ways. There are times you want the person, you want to calm them down and try to get them to quit trying so hard. Do what you can to make them understand that it's okay to make a mistake. There are other times when it is imperative that they do not make a mistake. And it's balance, and you have to give them both of that. That's one of the things that our tests do. We give people tests to put them in a situation where they're very nervous, they're uncertain of the outcome, and that they must perform. And you learn a lot about a person, and they learn a lot about themselves during that situation. So you may have some people who are very timid and they don't want to test. Because I have people like this myself that they'll say, well, you know, I know I'm ready to test, but I really don't care anything about a SASH. I don't want to test. Do what you can to make them test. Trick them into testing. Because that is a part of growth that each person must go through in order to get to the next level. Otherwise, they're missing out on that aspect of something being very important. Them being able to act as though their life depended upon it, or as something very important depends upon it. You don't have that situation in class very often. So you've got to use it to the best of your ability during tests. So that's why if I have a person that's taking a test, and they're just as cool as a cucumber, and they know the material, and I know they know the material, I'll usually throw something in there. I'll ask them a question they have absolutely no way of knowing the answer to. And then I may flip them over to something else, and flip them over to something else, psychologically, in order to get them to question things, so that they'll be unsure, so that I can see how they're going to perform whenever they're not quite so confident. It's not always good for your students when they take a test to have that so well that they come up there and they're just perfect. It is good. I love to see it. But when that happens, throw something in there to see if you can throw them off track, and then see how they react when they're off track. It'll help them out, and it'll help you out too, so you'll know about what level they're at. And that holds true all the way up to black sash, not just for your yellow and orange sash, green sash. Any questions on attitudes? You guys are just good, aren't you? Encouragement, I think we discussed that pretty good bit last week. Visualization skills. There are basically 3 visualization skills that I think we need to go over. Let's see if I have those written down somewhere. You've probably seen me in class do visualization skills on colors, where we get people to close their eyes and concentrate on a particular color until they can see that color in their mind's eye. And then we'll swap it to a different color. I have the people sit down, usually stay relaxed, breathe nice and deep, but smooth, you know, not... When I say breathe deep, it just means to take a good, long inhalation, not one that is an exercise. It should be nice and smooth. But then I'll call out a color, and I'll get everybody in class to raise their hand when they can see that color. Now you've got a lot of people, especially with kids, they're going to raise their hand just like that, and they never see the color. But it's obvious who's really seeing the colors and who is not. It's very difficult to change that quick on your visualization. But what it does is it gets them to focus on one particular thing. With their eyes closed, they're not distracted as much. It also helps you to be able to learn how to use your third eye or your visualization skills to be able to see things in your mind's eye. Because some people have a lot of trouble seeing things in their mind's eye. And there may be little that you can do with that in some people. Some people deal more with abstracts. Some people deal more with numbers, some with visualization. So everybody uses a different format in order to learn with. But visualization, being able to see something, as I mentioned to you before, is very important. So those who have trouble doing that, and most of the time, if you talk to them, they'll tell you, I have trouble seeing things in my mind. You know, because especially if you ask that question a lot on one-on-one, before they do a technique, they need to be able to see it. And a lot of times when you see people that are slow at learning or having trouble doing something, they may do it 5 times and they do it wrong every time, you know. It's that they have a problem visualizing it. So they are still trying to assimilate their body into something that they can't. They're trying to get it to copy something they can't see. And so you want to give them some exercises to help them work on their visualization skills. As I mentioned to you last week, if you can't see it, you can't accomplish it. It is something that you have to be able to visualize. And there's a lot of power in visualization. So make sure that you understand that's a tool that you want to work with a lot. Those students who are poor in visualization skills are going to learn slow. So push those in the sense that give them some visualization exercises and make sure that those people who are having trouble, that you talk to them one-on-one and ask them to practice these visualization skills at home. Also, break them out one-on-one and ask them before they do a technique what the name of something is. Or let's say you've got a 5-movement technique where it's a block, a strike, a step and another strike, a twist and a strike, a step and a strike, and a kick. You guys have the innate ability to see those things just like that. You know, you say it to yourself one time, and then you can do it. Or you can say it and see them at the same time. The majority of everything that I wrote down for a song informed techniques I did sitting at a desk, you know. So I could see it in my mind's eye and just write it down. And you guys have the same skill level. It's obvious just to watch it, and I know that. But those people that don't, if you ask them, okay, what's the first thing you do, they may get the block. And you say, what's next? They will have to sit and think. Chances are they're going to miss 2 or 3 of those out of those 5. They're not going to know exactly what comes next. And that's a dead giveaway to you that they have problems with their visualization. All right? Another thing is that'll help you with your visualization is say the names of things as often as possible. Whenever you're teaching your beginning classes, words help people associate visions, sights. So a lot of times you're talking about the technique that you're going to do, and you say push block. When I say push block, you guys automatically see a push block. But people with poor visualization skills, they don't see anything. You see? So they're still trying to figure out what that push block is. And because they're thinking about something else, they miss. So they're missing half your class all the time. Concentrate on visualization skills. One of them is that color thing. Another one can be dot absorption, where you stare at one particular object for so long that that one particular object is all you see. It takes time, but it is something that you can work with. Just like an archer, Zen archery, they look at that bullseye until the little big dot down there gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until really it's this big, and there's no way they can miss it. So this is a meditation type exercise that you can practice maybe a couple times in a class, mention to them, and some people will get really caught up in it. They'll say, wow, that's neat. They'll go home and practice it. They may get something out of it. They may not. If you don't mention it to them at all, they're not going to get anything for sure. Time is a problem because you don't have time to go over these things in class all the time. You don't have an opportunity to maybe go over it once a quarter at CP. But they're never going to be aware of them. Remember that reality again. They can't focus on them. They can't do anything until you bring it to their attention. That word attention again is that focal point. Their attention is what they're focused on. What they're focused on is what they're aware of. What they're aware of is their reality. It is not even real to them until that point. So it's up to you to bring it up to them. Am I getting too repetitious on this? All right. The other one is, in sparring and techniques, we have a thing where we mentioned that we use our peripheral vision. And that means that we don't want to actually look in on a target, zoom in on a target, say that's where we're going to hit, so on and so forth. We stare with a gaze. And I have found that these 3D pictures that are very hot right now are very good visualization aids for people to use. So mention that to them. Maybe bring one to class sometime and see how many people can see it. Because what you do with your eyes there is you let them relax totally so that they're not focused on any one thing. They open up, they relax, spread out, so that they can see two things at once. And that's what we try to do in Kung Fu. When we're sparring, you see, is you let your eyes separate so they're not looking at any one thing. And then you've got this whole gamut of visualization in your peripheral area right here that you can react to instantly. If you're actually looking at something, you're going to have a hard time to react on it. Let me close this door. You'll need to come back some other If you'd rather leave class or something, that'd be all right. Where were we?
3D images.
3D images. Bring those into class. Let people use them. You know, mention to them what we're trying to accomplish by spreading out the eyes. I think that that those will be beneficial in helping with the visualization skills. And we'll go over that when we get to sparring and techniques on how that is used. Which is a little bit, it's a different part of visualization as far as being able to see in your mind's eye. That is more of realistic visualization, but it's still an exercise. I just thought I'd bring that up. Those 3D pictures make pretty good exercise. Keep in mind that to be able to accomplish something, you've got to be able to see it. And if you can't see it in your mind's eye, chances are you'll never be able to accomplish it. And that's a hard statement to say, but my philosophy, that's part of our philosophy. That's my philosophy. And I have found through my lifetime, if I could not see something, I couldn't make it happen. And I have tried my best to see something so that it would become a reality. And it's as though those things which cannot be, you won't be able to see. Now, whether or not there are forces outside of you that make it where you cannot accomplish it, I have no idea. But I have studied that particular aspect of visualization quite a bit. Quite a bit. And I have also found that once I can see something, that there's virtually nothing that can stop it from happening. And the more clearly you see it, the more obvious it is that it will become a reality. Now, as I mentioned before, that could be something as basic as buying a new car, or it could be whether or not you're going to date somebody, or whether or not you're going to have a child. You concentrate on that. You ask yourself questions about it, and you'll get answers back. And the visualization that you get can let you know right off the bat whether it's going to become a reality or not. So I would suggest play with that. Any of you had any similar situations happen to you? Yeah. I know you've got to have something, Howard.
I just can't think of it, man.
Okay.
I have one my friend told me to come to his house. I did not knowing where to go. I couldn't get there. But when I started to follow him, I actually see where he turned and where to go to, and I was able to get to his house by seeing where he turned and so on.
Had you ever followed him before?
No.
You just imagined where would he go?
I know when he told me to go there, I didn't make it, so I called him up. When he come out, I followed him to his house. That's how I get there. But I was thinking of that as more like visualizing where he turned and things like that. Because when I go there next time, I start seeing where he turned, things like that.
You start seeing where he turned rather than where you turned.
Yeah.
It's hard to see ourselves sometimes, and that is very difficult visualization, to visualize yourself because you can't see it, you know? That's why whenever we're working and you want your students to see in their mind's eye the combination form, you don't get them to look at themselves doing the combination form. You get them to see you do it because they can visualize that a lot easier. Visualizing yourself is very difficult. It's just not something you see very much. Okay, let's look back on sounds. Billy was the only person that seemed to understand anything about sounds and the importance of them last week. Anybody in here got any feelings about that?
Use them all the time.
Hmm?
We use them all the time. It's necessary to.
I'm not talking about sounds that come out of your mouth.
I understand that. When you're doing a form, when you're standing there, getting your mind clear, you develop a sound that you want this form to sound like, and then you time that form to that sound that you visualize.
Good, excellent. That's right.
Same thing for techniques.
Everything has a sound that corresponds to it. Without sound, it's very difficult to have good timing. You know? Very difficult. It's like a perception that is missing. And it's like seeing in 2 dimensions instead of 3 dimensions. It's such a part that is thrown out that your timing is off. And as I mentioned last week, timing is everything in martial arts. No matter how good you are, if your timing is off, nothing works. Okay? Nothing. You can be the best practitioner in the world and have poor timing and you can't go anywhere. You can have the most perfect automobile, but the timing be off on it and it's not going to run. You can have the most balanced tire in the world, and then it gets out of balance and you can't go anywhere. Timing is the key. And one of the most important roles that play in developing good timing is your ability to be able to hear the sound of movements, the sound of one hand clapping, which is nothing more than to actually be able to hear in your mind's ear the sound when somebody does this. Okay? It's the same thing as the visualization skills, except it's on an audible level. If you were dribbling a basketball and you couldn't hear, it'd be very difficult to get that basketball dribbling very good because your dribble is based more on the sound than it is the amount of time that it takes for it to go down and come back up. You develop a rhythm based on sound more so than sight, more so than feel. Okay? So when someone's punching at you, you want to block that based more on sound than you do sight. Because sight's going to leave you a little bit short. Sight's going to make you have to analyze it too much, and you won't be able to react to timing as much. That's why music is so much of timing. If you watch something on TV, let's say silent movies or something like Fantasia, that may be cartoons of changing colors and movements and rhythms and patterns, without the music to it, it doesn't mean a whole lot. Without any sound, it's very difficult for you to get a real rhythm or timing. It may be really a very slow song, and you can't tell. I played, back when I was playing in the bands, we did senior prom for the North Carolina School for the Deaf in Morgan one time. It was remarkable. They couldn't dance to what we were doing visually, and they couldn't hear it. So they would all come up to the stage and put their hands on the stage and feel the vibration of it so that they could get the rhythm. So they had to substitute that vibration there for the hearing in order to get the timing for the music. Now there were occasions whenever we would be playing a song that maybe had a slow bass and a slow bass drum, but yet was a fast song, and they'd be slow dancing to it. You know? But the point is still that the sound has a lot to do with your timing. So develop that. Understand the rhythm that's going to come from being able to hear. And from that, you're going to work on your techniques, your sparring, your individual kicks, your individual punches, and you will constantly be working to change the rhythm of what you hear, the sound, how long it takes from the time you start till you make contact with something. There is a sound attributed to both of those that develops a rhythm, depending upon how fast you want to attack. If you don't hear that first, you can't copy it. You can't punch fast and say, well, how fast are you going to punch? Well, I'm just going to punch as fast as I feel like I need to, and when it gets there, ever how long it takes, that's the speed it'll be. That's improper. You first of all got to determine in your mind's ear what the sound is going to be, how fast it's going to get there, and then you mimic that rhythm. Now, you may not be able to get to it in that speed, but you'll be expanding your horizons each time by going outside your comfort zone that we've talked about. Eventually, you'll be able to get faster and faster and faster by trying to mimic that sound. You see, timing is nothing more than the distance between those two sounds. So work toward being able to hear more what's happening. When a person punches at you, you want to be able to hear his fist. And by hear it, meaning that it will make, at what point would it make a sound when it made contact with you? And therefore, you'll be able to react to that sound rather than the sight. And it takes both. But together, you have a balance. With just one, you don't. All right? With just sight or with just sound, you're going to be a bit out of balance. So put a lot of importance on that. Mention it to your students. I would say orange sash and above. And a lot of that's going to depend upon the individual too. If, just like in the 5 modes of execution, you want to be able to have accuracy of movement first, Let the body accept responsibility for its own actions, and then allow the mind to be able to come in there and put in these little innuendos like sights and sounds. If they're having trouble just doing the kick, don't worry about timing. Okay? Now, if a person's doing a kick and they look good at it, but they're an orange sash and they're still doing it like they don't even have a sash, then you need to talk to them about changing their tempo. And a good opportunity comes up then about talking about sound. You're going to find that students are constantly getting in a rut to where they feel comfortable with something. They've been doing something the same way for so long, and it feels pretty good to them. So they enjoy doing it at that speed. Tempo, you've got to change the tempo. And when you change the tempo, everything changes. They will feel a little more uncoordinated at a faster tempo. Sometimes slowing it down will do the same thing. Let them understand that changing the tempo is a must, something that you have to do, and that when you change the tempo, it's going to feel uncomfortable. And their job is to get it to where it feels comfortable again so that you can change the tempo again to where it's uncomfortable. And that's progress. Otherwise, they're going to continue to stay at the same level. They'll have a hard time progressing past where they are. You see it quite frequently that people have been orange sash for a year and a half. Most of the time, it's because they are just too comfortable with what they're doing. You've got to push them past that point of comfort. Mottos, I think that we talked about that pretty good bit. Allies. When can you use your allies? Now, we mentioned about being able to use gravity as an ally. I think that's about the only one we talked about very much. The thing you've got to understand about using gravity as an ally is that if you are moving in one direction, the amount of weight that you have on the foot of the direction that you're moving is proportional to your ability to use gravity as an ally. That's a mouthful. If I'm in a cat stance and I want to move forward, I only have 5% of my weight on the front leg. Gravity's not going to be very much of an ally at that point. If I'm in a horse stance and I want to move forward, left horse stance, I want to move to the left. Gravity, excellent ally at that point. If I'm in a forward stance or a bow and arrow stance, it becomes even a greater force. So the more weight that you have on that foot, anything from 50% over, if that amount of weight is in the direction that you want to move, gravity can be a tremendous ally. Here again, this is not something you want to get into with somebody at, below orange sash and below, maybe green sash and above. Occasionally, a person who's doing really well, orange sash, you might want to bring it into play and mention it to them. And it's okay to mention things like this to a group when you're trying to speak mostly to green and blue sashes over here, even though you've got some yellow and orange in here. Chances are they're going to listen to it, they may pick up on it, that's great. But most likely it's not going to mean anything to them. They're going to be too busy trying to figure out where their foot is to even worry about using gravity as an ally. Okay? So these are not hard and fast factual rules that says don't mention this here, don't mention it there. I want you to be aware of that. Now, when can we use momentum as an ally? Any ideas?
use your opponent's momentum or use your own momentum?
Just about any time that you start to go in on a person, you can use your momentum. And in Kung Fu, what we're talking about is your ability to keep something in motion once it started in motion. That's why we have circular moves in Kung Fu rather than short, choppy ones. We use a lot of momentum. Once something gets moving, you want to keep it moving. Okay? Same thing in your stances. Once you go through these stances, you may move to here, and you move to here, and you move to here, and the momentum carries right on through. When you're using a weapon, you will find that momentum is another thing. What you are constantly working to accomplish with a weapon is to allow the weapon to use momentum to keep it going, rather than forcing the weapon to move, as everybody does in the beginning. They won't allow centrifugal force and momentum to keep the weapon going. Here again, gravity is used there too. When you look at weapons, especially like a staff or a spear, sword, same thing, you allow gravity. You get that thing started with the gravity, pull it as much as possible. Once you get the momentum going, you let the momentum and centrifugal force keep it in motion. You turn it. You don't, the centrifugal force is what keeps it on a good plane. Without the centrifugal force, it starts to wobble. So you want it to be like a gyroscope. Once it's spinning, it won't change its direction. So centrifugal force and the momentum of that spin are very important. Your spinning kicks, it's very important to be able to muster up enough centrifugal force to start it with and enough momentum to finish it. Many people will kick and lose their momentum on like an iron butterfly kick. You also want to use centrifugal force on your spinning kicks like an ice skater does. What does an ice skater do in order to be able to increase his spin? Pulls things in. Gets things in as close as possible. And when he stops, he throws things out to help him stop. Now, with that in mind, we're talking momentum and centrifugal force here. When people are doing these kicks, and they're spinning kicks, and they're flailing their arms are out around when they do it, they're stopping themselves. So you're going to see a lot of people who are doing an iron butterfly kick, and they can't get all the way around. This is what I mean about, as an instructor, you've got to be able to recognize what it is about that person that they need in order to give them the little extra boost to get through that particular hurdle, whatever it is. If you're aware of these things, if you can stay focused on them, if you can ask yourself the right questions, see now, what is it that's making that person not be able to get all the way around? How can they get all the way around? You'll come up with a lot of ideas, but be aware that these allies are things that come up all the time. They can be an enemy. Every ally can be an enemy. Gravity can be an enemy. It is. Another thing to be aware of in spinning kicks and using centrifugal force and momentum is that you want to keep the leg tucked in until it goes out. When it goes out, shoot it out, but shoot it up. You need to kick high. Try this yourself. Do an iron butterfly kick and kick hip high. Right here. It's very, very difficult to do because you are throwing everything out as far as it'll go, and then it gets off balance. When you kick high, that's just like the skater having his hands in like this. Here, you see, the higher it gets, the closer in they are. The lower you kick, the further out they are, which means the slower you're going to spin, or it's going to stop. You'll almost tear your back out trying to do an iron butterfly kick flat. So concentrate on getting them to kick higher. The higher they kick, the more in it is. So that's going to help. So centrifugal force then will become an ally. And the momentum will help carry the kick all the way through. Any questions on the allies? Just bringing back some things to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Water, we talked about water. Any questions about water? Anything that anybody needs to have a little more mentioned? Well, remember that to act as water can be a part of your everyday life as well as part of your martial arts life. It can be a part of your work environment. It can be a part of your relationship. Many people get hurt because they cannot take on the attitude of water. And I mean emotionally hurt, physically hurt, mentally hurt, spiritually hurt. The more you become like water, the less you can be hurt. The more you become the opposite of water, the more you're going to be hurt. Now you say, well, how does that work emotionally? Or how can somebody hurt you emotionally if you're not acting like water? I mean, it's easy to see that if somebody punches you and hits you and you're not like water, that something's got to give, right? Same thing plays in relationships, business adventures, same thing. Whatever kind of attack there is, your resistance is going to be directly proportional to the amount of pain that's going to be involved. So whenever the attack comes, I'm not saying that you avoid it. I'm saying that you absorb it. Okay? Okay. Pulls. Many of you have heard me talk about the body's inability to use pulls, or the muscle's inability to pull. That all muscles contract, and therefore contraction is not a pull. It's really, it's not a push, it's a contraction, which is a pull. Did I say all that stuff wrong? Let's start over. Erase that. The body's inability to push and the muscle's inability to push. They contract, which is a pull. And what we want to do in Soma is to put into people's minds the visual idea of the body pulling. We're going to get into a little later on a discussion about focus and timing and your focal point. Many times people can practice Kung Fu and they do really good until you put an object in front of them to hit. And then everything falls apart. The pull no longer becomes a pull. It's a push at that point. And you see it yourselves. When people kick at something, they push. When they punch at something, they push. The body is trained through natural occurrences, just living, that whenever it meets a resisting force, then it must prepare for that resisting force. What we try to do in Kung Fu, in a Soma, is to say that there are no resisting forces other than your own. Every time you punch, at the point of impact, that tightening up is your resisting force. It's one of the hardest things to do is to overcome your body's natural tendency to compensate for a resisting force. It's like punching at an object and knowing that there's going to be a tremendous force back at you equal to the force that you're giving it. And so therefore you have a tendency to punch harder. You have a tendency to lean into it more. You have a tendency to actually make contact sooner and then push through it in order to compensate for the resisting force. Whenever you train the body from the beginning to deal with pulls, it is our hope that as you progress through the Soma, you'll be able to deal with these resisting forces with a little more control, because you told your body over and over and over again that you're doing a pull, that your body's pulling. Concentrate on the opposite side pulling to cause the other side to go out. This is what gives you the balance that you need. And without that pull, even though this may, in all reality, look like a push, the opposite pull is the concentrating force, and it helps keep everything in balance. Once you think about pushing, and this side's pushing, and you forget about the pull, then the body is way out of balance. So think about those. We have linear pulls, lateral pulls, and torques or twists. On the papers you guys have been using, those things are all backwards. I don't know why. I don't know who wrote them down that way, but they are. So correct them. Linear pulls is anything that's going back and forth this way. Lateral pulls are things that go to the side, like the back fist strikes and the knife hands, and the inverted ridge hands. So these are linear pulls here, all right? Palm strikes, punches. These are lateral pulls here. Now you've got torques. Those pulls, like this. This pull. You've got to concentrate on what's going on with the opposite side. Pull. If you're not careful, you'll be concentrating only with this hand that's doing the push block. So even if it is called a push block, which maybe we should have never done that, you want to concentrate on being able to pull the body and twist it around. Okay? Any questions on pulls? You guys must be real smart.
Can I make a statement on pulls?
Yes.
Okay, the balance, a lot of that's like the doing by not doing. As long as you're thinking about the hand that's not doing, you're not concentrating on the hand that is doing. And it seems as though you'll lose a lot of speed and you lose a lot of power if you concentrate on the arm that's doing. A lot of times I have better results with students when they can concentrate on the hand that's actually pulling in rather than the hand that's going out, because it takes the mind off the hand that's going out. And the hand that's going out automatically tries to balance.
That's right. That's exactly it. I don't know if you understood all that, but what he's talking about is the balance again. I said the same thing in a different way, that this hand will get out of balance because too much of the mind is associated with the hand that's going out. It's a push, looks like a push, the pull gets all out of balance. Howard and I have for years called this opposite hand, the pulling hand, the hand that is not doing. Because your students have a tendency to feel as though this hand does nothing. Okay? Although there is no such thing as a hand that's not doing, because it is doing something. But we call it that, the hand that's not doing. So in a punch, This is the hand that's not doing. You get them to concentrate on this hand. You see people that do this kind of thing all the time, right? So I say, what's that hand doing? And that's where the term, the hand that's not doing. It's not doing anything, it's just laying there. The hand that's not doing does need to be doing something. And so keep them concentrating on that hand that's not doing.
Typically, at what point in time, and I'm speaking of starting with a brand new student, at what point in time do you really start to make them pay attention to that opposite hand? I know that in the tape that we have, we mention the opposite hand occasionally, but we don't. It doesn't seem like we put a lot of stress from the very beginning that person needs to pay attention to the opposite hand. And I guess one reason is because it's too much to think about to begin with.
No, I would say you need to do that in the beginning.
From the very
From
beginning.
the very beginning. When I put students, I teach them this punch as we did in the tape. I said, imagine that you've got a rope tied to this hand, hooked to the wall, pull me or whatever it is, this one, right? Now what happens when you pull this one? This is linear pulls. That is the action of linear pulls. That this pulls, forcing this one out. This one pulls, forcing this one out. Regardless of what you're doing with it. So in the beginning you want to concentrate and push pulls. On the tape it was very difficult for us because I didn't want to be repetitive on that tape.
Okay, so in reality, when we teach in the very beginning to a student, we should put as much emphasis on the pulling hand or the opposite hand as we do on that hand that's actually doing it.
No, you should put more emphasis on the hand that is pulling. Which is what Howard was saying there. He gets better results when they put more emphasis on it. Yes, that's exactly right. Especially in the beginning stages. Later on, once this becomes natural, that is when we start putting focus on the hand that's doing. That is when the attention goes right through the hand. That is when the chi flows and goes out to the knuckles. Okay? At a certain time, concentration has to be right where you're hitting and what you're hitting with an explosive force. All of your concentration has to be on that one point. But in the beginning, you don't need that. You don't need to be thinking about what you're hitting with or what you're hitting, you see? So you want to put more and more emphasis on the opposite. Later on, green sash and above, you should be concentrating more on focal, specific focus on exactly where you're hitting, concentration of pinpoint accuracy. That's why accuracy is much more important than green sash and above. Good question. I'm glad we cleared that up for you.
Well, I found that I talked a lot about what the opposite hand was doing, but I still didn't put nearly enough stress on what was going on.
I talk about it all the time.
Huge difference.
I mention it all the time to my students. And I don't know if you hear it, but usually it's a comment. What's this hand doing? Pull that back, pull that back, pull that back.
Yes, I hear that, and I think at the time when I was really reviewing the tapes and trying to go by the tapes, I was not realizing the fact that it was left out because it didn't want to repeat it so much. And I may have been teaching it the same now.
Don't want to repeat it on the tapes. It just takes up a lot of time. But in application, when you're teaching, you do want to concentrate on the pulls. That's why we use the word pull as often as possible as we're going through it, rather than punch. And then what we did on the tapes?
It's very easy to do that in linear and lateral pulls, but I was, when you got talking about torques, I noticed that I never really got into the fact that the opposite arms are pulling the torques.
Well, we're going to talk about those things here a little bit too. So let's go on, and I'll bring that up in more detail. Matter of fact, that's probably going to come into play a little bit on this next item, timing. There are all kinds of timing, okay? You've got the timing of the upper body to the lower body, the right side to the left side. You've got the timing for the twist, the torque to the linear, the lateral to the torque. All those things have to be taken into consideration. In the beginning, the thing that you want to concentrate on for timing is these two hands. That's the first priority, all right? As you'll notice, we don't do anything with stepping at all until we start working with combination form. Now, I will mention to you that in the combination form, before you get to the combination form, show them how to walk. I don't know if you guys have been doing that or not. But concentrate on walking in a forward stance. Work with them in such a way that with their hands on their elbows so that they can see that whenever they make a movement that these arms don't move. Because most people have a tendency to do this. Alright? And you want to keep them straight on when they step here. Now this brings up a few things. Timing with the stance to the attack. And I think that still a lot of people have problems understanding exactly how those two fit together. Because some of you feel as though you should be in the stance before you attack. Some of you people think that you should attack before you're in the stance. Some people say that they should both be at the same time. They're all true. Okay? You know, teaching is not a revolutionary thing. It's an evolutionary process. So you have to evolve from one thing to another. And many times in evolution, the end product looks nothing like the beginning product. And that holds true with Kung Fu. We were talking about exaggerating the moves. You want to exaggerate your moves during solo techniques. Whenever you're practicing on your own, by yourself, for the purpose of developing finer skills. You want to exaggerate your movements. Exaggerate your stances, exaggerate the movement, exaggerate the length of your punch, exaggerate the depth and movement of the block. You exaggerate these movements. Just like, as I mentioned, you would if you were in the first or second grade and you're learning printing. You make a great old big A. You exaggerate it for motor skills so that you can refine it and get it perfect. So that exaggeration in movement really helps refine the movement. In application, you want to minimize your movements. So it's two different things there, you see. You don't exaggerate your movements in application. You do that whenever you're practicing. Application, remember we talked about the difference between being missed by an inch and a foot. There's no difference. You want to be missed by an inch. If you can block and only move your hand 2 inches to block, why move it 12 inches to block? Minimize your movements. Many of you take on the notion that because you practice something a certain way, that's the way it must always be done. And that's not the case. There are some things that hold true. Your focal point for a block should always be in the same place. You should always do that block the same way whenever you're practicing. But in application, the only thing that holds true is that that focal point must be at the point that intersects the attack in such a way that you're not going to get hit. Punch is coming in, you've got to get that block at that thing at the right point. And that's your timing.
So whether or not you exaggerate it or minimize it, time is always the same.
That's right. The timing is going to be the same. Now, if you're not careful and you've always maximized your movements, then you're expecting it to take you too long to get from point A to point B. You'll never get there. See? You block in transition. And if you look at blocking in transition, and you look at minimizing your movements, you'll find that most of the time, whenever you block, you don't need much force. You don't need much energy. Okay? And whenever you use timing properly with your attacks, you don't need a tremendous amount of distance. It always helps. And whenever you possibly can, get as much distance out of what you're doing as possible. Right? And we always know that. When we're practicing, we want to try to get that punch as long as possible. Now, Soma takes in a lot of different areas. Long-range techniques, short-range techniques. Soft and hard. So that doesn't mean that everything you do must be long-range. You've got to learn to develop your skills, and then you've got to put them into application. Developing them, as you look at any other martial arts style, you'll see that when they're developing their skills, especially in the beginning, it looks nothing like what they actually use. You know, I mean, it really just looks like some stupid exercises. And to a large degree, it is a bunch of stupid exercises to a novice. But what they're doing is setting in motion those necessary skills so that you can put things into application later on. So be aware that things have to change. That people do things differently as you go on up the ladder. Don't do things the same way all the way through. If you are a green sash and you're still doing a block the same way you did it as a yellow sash, chances are you're doing it wrong. Now, I'm not saying that it should be bastardized so much that you can't even tell what it is anymore. Okay? But a push block in true application may look just like this. Okay? And that's all. Because that's all that's needed. Now, all of you have at some point in time have been in a situation where you have been asked to exaggerate things so far down on the other end of the spectrum that it's just unbelievable. But there's a reason for that. There are times when we may have a person kick and reach so far that they're about to fall down, right?
Or do fall down.
Or they do fall down, exactly. Only so that you can gradually pull them back and get them where they really need to be. Because most people won't gradually go into something like that and get to the point they need to be. It has to be exaggerated. And once you're past it, it's easy to pull back. Once you've done something to the max, it's easy to minimize. But if you've always minimized, it's very difficult to maximize, you see? So that's why in the beginning you maximize your movements. In application, you're going to minimize them. And you'll see that most people do it anyway. If you see two people of a high rank sparring, you don't see them going into something like this right here to do a block when they're sparring, right? That is to teach some movement. It's to teach harmony. It's to teach the torque, to exaggerate the movements so that they can get a feel for the circles, so that they can use momentum and centrifugal force because they have felt it. When it's small, it's really hard to feel. You know? It's hard to understand how it works. It's very difficult to use it. So all this exaggeration should be up front. It's easier to develop timing on something that's exaggerated. Whenever you start off in your sparring, yellow sash level, slow sparring, only thing that you're working on there is timing. A little bit of distance. Distance comes more into play in orange sash. So everything's exaggerated. The timing there is such that, as I mentioned, it's like two people playing patty cake. All right? Timing in sparring is most important for defense. Okay? As long as you can match your opponent's timing, defense is impeccable. Mismatching timing is for offense. Okay? So what are we teaching there at this yellow sash level? We're automatically, first of all, we're telling them that they need to match their opponent's timing. And that if they strike and get in on them, then they're doing it wrong. So you see, again, the only thing that they're working toward right here is to be able to block. So I take my students usually at when they first start sparring, and I spar with them personally. I usually have only one person blocking and one person attacking. And the person blocking must match the speed of the person attacking. That's all it's for. Then they'll swap off. The person attacking then becomes the blocker. At that point, you're working on timing. And the timing for a technique is, for the most part, defense. Okay? Timing of upper body and lower body. I have some people that they may come in with a block, punch, and strike instead. Yeah? Or they may turn like this, upper body, lower body. The upper body is in such a hurry to punch that it gets there way before this can ever get back. So you don't have that solid brace there that you get with. And there are times when that's okay too. But when you're training someone, you want to train them to be able to match the time. You want to be able to get the upper body and lower body in sync first. It's real easy to pull it out of sync if you need to. Okay? It's very easy to minimize once you maximize. It's very easy to work on something out of timing and out of sync once you have learned to get it in timing and in sync. In striking and in kicking, timing is much more important than power. Now, I'm not saying that power is not important, nor that speed is not important, but without proper timing, those can all be neutralized. As I mentioned to you about shooting with a rubber band, right? Remember that? Pull this rubber band back like this. Let it fly. Let's say it's a straight rubber band, right? It's been broken. Let go of this end right here. You let go of that end at the proper time. The energy goes that way. And the amount of mismatched timing that you have between letting go of these determines the amount of force that rubber band is going to go with. And it can be totally neutralized if you let go of both of them at the same time. Actually, it can go backwards too. You let go of this one first. Just like some people punch like this. Huh? Right? So, timing is important. Now, what is the proper timing for a punch and a stance? What is the proper timing for the torque? At what point do you make contact? And where's your focal point? And how far do you go past it? Those are questions that you have to have a good feel for in order to be able to get your students to develop and maximize their potential with the force in which they're going to contact or hit something. Any answers?
There was about 14 questions in there.
That's right. Pick one. Okay. Concentrate on yourselves for a while. Over the next month or so, I want you to do some practice on punching. And what I want you to do is maximum amount of power into your target with minimum amount of effort. I want you to get the maximum amount of mass at the end of your fist. Okay? Now, what's the maximum amount of mass that you could have at the end of your fist?
Your entire body.
Entire body. Exactly. Now, I also want you to work with getting the maximum amount of speed timed with the maximum amount of mass so that they both reach point of impact at the same time. Then you will have your time. But let me tell you, you are looking at split microsecond timing there. Just like you are with this rubber band. It is really split timing that you let that thing go in such a way to actually get it to go that way. And when you look at your entire body moving forward and timing it with your hand moving forward at such a tremendous speed, it's going to be difficult. I'll give you a hint. Do everything slow. Don't do it fast. Work on speed later, once the timing gets there. Timing is where you're going to do the most damage here, not how hard you hit. And you may want to do some board breaking to verify this. It's a good opportunity to break boards. In that sense that when you punch, you may end up seeing that your fist, your arm is totally straight, just about the same time that your body's still moving slightly forward. Now, getting those two timed is what you want to do. You don't want to have your body completely in the stance right here, which a lot of them do, and then you've got this. You may as well just stand here and punch. Okay? You don't want to have it so that whenever you're coming forward, you're hitting it here, and this arm is completely loose or bent. When this arm is completely bent, it acts as a shock absorber that you don't want. You really want to hit it when this arm is almost perfectly straight. Just prior to that split second, you've got a half inch or an inch of more movement with your body and with your hand. You want this arm to be straightened out this time too. Okay? These guys came down from the Leak High School up in Virginia. Everything that they do, they keep the arm bent all the time. They never straighten it out. And they don't quite understand straighten it out. And they, different philosophies though. See, and that's part of the philosophy here. Some schools of thought say that once the arm's straightened out, all the power's gone. So, it just depends on your philosophy and how you're putting that into application. If that is your philosophy, then your application is going to have to be different, you see. You are going to have to hit more back here. You are going to have to use more of a thrusting action through. Okay? So the application rests on the philosophy. Without knowing what our philosophy is about straightening that arm out, then it's very difficult to come up with proper application. Knowing it is a cake. Now, I'm not saying that you should never strike with your arm bent. Because there are very few hard rules in Kung Fu. Very few. But there are a lot of hard evolutionary rules. There are very hard rules at a certain point in time, but those rules evolve. Just like a child. The rules that you give to a 1-year-old do not match the rules you give to a 2-year-old, and they don't match the ones that you give to a 4-year-old, so on and so forth. If you do, can you imagine what your kid would grow up with if you allowed them to use the same rules at age 1 until they were grown? Man. And that's what a lot of us are doing with our students when we set forth these rules and regulations. We try to teach them something at yellow sash, and we allow them to keep that all the way through their training. No, you've got to make sure that they understand that the old has to be passed away, and the new has to come on. Part of the philosophy. Work with that on the timing. Okay? Play with it. You need to actually be hitting something. So while we're talking about hitting something, we want to talk about that resisting force. Our philosophy is that we never hit anything. We never hit anyone. All right? We never block anything. We never block anyone. We block and hit our focal point. And that sounds a little strange. But our focal point is always going to be there. It allows us to be able to maximize our potential without augmenting the technique because of a resisting force. And you, when you punch at a bag or do any board breaking or punch at a mitten, it's an excellent opportunity for you to put that into practice. Strike the focal point. Now the focal point has got to change. How deep is your focal point on a human body? Who can give me an answer?
Depends on where you're hitting the ball.
Exactly. And let's see, that's why he's a fourth degree. Because most people would say half inch in, 1 inch in, right? Do you guys have any ideas? What does he mean by different? Depends on where you're hitting the body. Let's say you're punching a guy in the skull, right there, right between the eyes, or right above, on the forehead. Where's your focal point?
That's about a quarter of an inch.
About a quarter of an inch in.
Not much further.
All right, not much further. Half inch? All right. What about if you're hitting him, say, let's say you're hitting him in the stomach? Inch and a half? You'd go for the spine? How far would you go in?
A couple inches.
Couple inches? All right. How about you, Howard? That
Depends on
sounds-
who it is. Now, if you got a 300-pound guy, you're going to hit for the spine.
That's
It
right.
also depends on how much damage you want to do to it.
That's true. Depends on whether or not you want to jolt them, whether you want to penetrate. All these things must be taken into consideration. But you're absolutely right. As far as hard surfaces require less penetration on the focal point, if your timing is right. Soft surfaces require more penetration. What makes this very difficult is that most of our practice is done with soft surfaces, such as focus mitt or an airbag. Mako water board, still probably one of the best things that you could use for practicing. Board breaking is still very important if you use it properly for penetration, timing, rather than seeing if you can break a board. Don't do board breaking for that. Board breaking can be something so that you can see how easy you can punch with proper timing and still break the board. Not how hard you can punch in order to get the board breaking. Right? So board breaking then is important in the sense that it gives you an opportunity to hit something very solid, like the skeletal system of the human body. And so that you can develop your timing better. These focus mittens, when you punch on a focus mitt and you only penetrate a half an inch, it feels as though you have done nothing. I mean, you can hit that thing, and the person sitting there just goes, it doesn't hardly move. But when you go 2 inches past it, boom, man, it looks like you really punched hard that time. You see? and the focal point is what's going to make a big difference. So be aware that you've got both sides of the spectrum there that you need to focus on with your timing. The timing to a soft object is going to be different than it goes to a hard object. Now, what else can I think of on timing?
May I add something?
Yes, sir.
Whenever I'm teaching somebody to either kick the bag or kick the button set, I try to start off with them touching it, because if you start off with them touching it, then you usually get a fairly good punch or a fairly good kick. And not let them kick it with full strength at the beginning, because they will try to do it.
Yeah,
They will
they'll
see
push it.
something happen,
They'll push it.
and they will push it. Everything will go to crap. So usually start with the touch. See how hard and how fast they can kick and just touch it. And then later on, if they do that well, I may let them kick it. If they don't do that well, then I don't.
Good point. Distance first. Basically what he said. Learn your distance first. Good. Anything else? Under techniques, for example, I've got several notes here. First consideration, distance. Second one's time, which is what we just mentioned. Learn the distance first, learn timing, then learn accuracy. This is what we do with our techniques. If you'll look at how you look at the yellow sash, orange sash, green sash, blue sash, techniques in sparring work pretty much the same way. Fourth thing to concentrate on with techniques is application. So yellow sash techniques have very little to do with application, proper application. They're good, exaggerated moves that work on distance and timing. Orange sash techniques work to refine distance, refine timing, and concentrate on accuracy. Green sash techniques, you even refine distance more, you refine timing more, you refine accuracy, and you concentrate on application. In application, you've got the 5 modes of execution that you should be aware of and concentrate on. Use those techniques and forms. And then you've also got, after you work on application, you work on being committed to the application, committing yourself to the technique, which we'll talk about in detail. So those are things that you want to be concerned about in your teaching. Follow those levels: distance, timing, accuracy, application. If you're not careful, you will have a person going from one level to the next before they have really developed anything at all, any skill at all in one of those areas, and that's where you come up with problems later on. They should not perfect distance and timing at yellow sash. Neither should they perfect distance and timing at orange sash whenever they're working on accuracy. But what you may have is you're going to have a person who is beginning to work on application, and he still has very little control over distance, very little control over timing, and very little control over accuracy, which means that they didn't get that well enough coming up through the other ones. As I mentioned, it is evolutionary, not revolutionary. So you can't have a revolutionary insight that's going to make those things work. If you did not evolve to them, you're stuck. So you need to take those people back and concentrate on those specifics. Generally, it works best to have them work on one thing at a time. Get them to work on nothing but distance for a while. And you can do that easy by, having 2 people stand there and let them test at one another. Have them step in different directions and throw a punch out. And and see if they stepped in the right place for the proper distance. You know, and it's something that's got to be intuitive after a while. They've got to know that when they step a particular angle and a particular distance with a certain stance, that their distance is going to be correct. I call this knowing how long your arms are, or knowing how long your legs are, because it stays constant. It's the same. What changes is the length of your stance. Now, you know, we teach in the beginning not to throw the shoulders, right? I'm getting a little bit out of something here, but I want to bring this up. Because some people feel as though you should not throw your shoulders. And that's not the case at all. I'm not saying that you shouldn't ever throw your shoulders. You will see more people at upper ranks throwing your shoulders than you'll ever even want to imagine that was even possible. It's the exaggerated movement again. It's the taking them way over on one side so that you can bring them back. You teach people not to throw their shoulders because the natural tendency is to throw their shoulders. You teach them not to throw their shoulders so that they can learn proper distance. They know how long their arm is because it doesn't change. Okay? If they're constantly throwing this thing out, then they're never going to really understand how long their arm is. Because every time they punch, it's a different length. But once they have a general feel for that distance, it's not going to matter anymore. Keeping the shoulders squared off doesn't matter anymore. You'll see that we do a lot of techniques where we twist all the way this way. You know? That's completely the opposite from keeping the shoulder squared off. We're throwing the shoulder as far as we can get it. Okay? We say keep the shoulders down at all times. But what happens whenever you do a ridge hand? You can't do a ridge hand with the shoulder down. You can't do a ridge hand like this. It's got to come up. So all these rules, as I said, they're not hard and fast. Keep that in mind. Yin and yang. Yin, female, passive, moon, night. Yang, male, sun, aggressive, daylight, positive. This does not mean positive in the sense of good and bad, even though yin is bad and yang is good. It just means that they both cannot exist without the other, and that one is always evolving into the other, and that there is a little piece of one in each of the other. They are not totally opposites. If so, the yin and yang symbol would be two half circles with a straight line down there. Huh? But they're not. It's a smooth arc, something that is constantly getting bigger and moving. And yet inside, right inside the biggest part of it, there's a piece of the other. Study the yin and yang. Get some books on it. Try to read up on the philosophy of it, because I think that will help you in teaching and understanding. That's why we have the hard and the soft, the long range and the short range. And rarely are you just one of those at any time. 5 modes of execution. William, tell me what the first 2 modes are on the 5 modes of execution.
Football,
What's the first mode in the 5 modes of execution?
football, refinement,
Uh-huh.
football, refinement, you say again then?
There is a paper
Yeah.
that you guys all have copies of, or should have, and you hand them out to your students. And it's called the 5 modes of execution. 5 different ways that you should do your techniques and forms progressively. You do one particular way, then you go and you do the next way, then you do it the next way, and you do it the next way, and then there's a final way. So the very first thing you should work on is the first mode. Do you know what it is? What is it?
The first, technique first. You may talk about technique on the form.
Either one. The first thing, first item on that piece of paper that's called the 5 modes of execution. It's not something you can guess at. Find that paper, read it, and understand it. We're going to be talking about it a little bit right now, so we'll see. All right? What is it?
It's been a while. I've looked at it, but I remember. I don't know if it's accuracy, fluidity. You want me to keep going?
No.
I don't know if those are the steps, but I remember.
Okay. This is something that you should be so intimately involved with that it becomes a part of you. There's really nothing that you do in life that's not really follow these 5 modes of execution. If you want to go through a systematic approach to something, if you systematically approach just about any skill, you're going to have to do it in this way. Now, you can haphazardly do it in ways, and you can have a certain amount of talent in a particular field, and you can skip some things. Don't get me wrong. But the average person, whether it's learning to type or whether you're learning to play golf or kung fu, you're going to go through these 5 modes of execution. The first one is accuracy, like you said. Accuracy means that if you're typing, you need to learn where the keys are and which finger goes to that key. And once you can type and know which one goes to what key, the next step is to be able to work on fluidity. How can I get my fingers to go to these keys in the easiest way, the smoothest way? All right? Because you'll find that some people type and their fingers are up and down. And you'll see other people who, when they type, just that finger moves and nothing else does. If you watch somebody play a saxophone, you'll see a good saxophone player, their fingers never leave the keys. They just push down like this. Some of them, their fingers are all on, lifting completely off the keys when they play. So they can never reach a certain level of proficiency. Fluidity. Once they can become fluid with those movements, using the least amount of effort, then they can go on speed. Because when something is nice and fluid, when you smooth out all the really hard lines and all the wrinkles in something, then you can get faster at it. So speed is the third mode of execution. After speed, if it comes down to something that requires any strong effort, then power is the 4th mode. 5th mode is what we have termed tempo, which means that at that point it is the conglomeration of all 4 modes of execution in such a way that makes whatever it is you're doing proper for the specific application. If it's a technique against somebody who's attacking you, then you do it in such a way that you're able to defend yourself and attack without him being able to block. If it's a form, you do it in such a way that you can make whoever it is watching you see in their mind's eye exactly what you're doing and have them believe that you are defending yourself and winning by doing some things nice and slow and smooth, and some things very fast, and some things with a tremendous amount of power. And by the way, power, there are 2 kinds of power. You know, Power is like, power can be positive and power can be negative. Power can be manifested inside you or it can be manifested outside you. You can have a tremendous amount of power without any direction. If it doesn't have direction, if it doesn't have focus or control, then the power is neutral. If I let go of the rubber band with both ends, there's the same amount of energy released there. The power is the same, but the result is completely different. Many people punch. This exercise that I mentioned that I want you guys to work on for the next couple of months should bring this out in the open. Many people punch, and yet the power remains in their body. The power is still in their chest. The power is still in their arm. The power never gets to here because some people punch like this. You see that kind of stuff before? I know because I've seen some of y'all do it. And what happens is, even no matter how far and how fast this goes, and all of a sudden everything is neutralized and the power jumps back up the arm. So learn about power, but learn how power is manifested, how it comes out. If you're doing forms for competition, it comes out through abrupt termination of movement. Okay? In striking, not necessarily so, but to some degree it still comes out in abrupt termination of movement. But if I'm doing a particular technique and I'm using centrifugal force and momentum as my ally, abrupt termination of movement is not the development of power, you see? Five modes of execution. It's very important. Be aware of it. Hand this out. Yellow and orange sash level. Or I would say once a person gets past their, or gets their yellow sash, it'd be a good time to give them 5 modes of execution. Talk about it, get them to read it, and get them to understand it. All right? The hard part is that people have a tendency to feel as though they never have gotten accuracy well enough, good enough to go to fluidity. So you'll find people, they get all the way up to green sash and they never practiced anything past accuracy. Remember that you've got to spread your horizons. You've got to expand the comfort zone. They're comfortable with it, working on it on accuracy because they feel like they've never really gotten it down. You've got to push them past that. They've got to get to a point to where accuracy is not so much of a concern. You can help in your classes by doing things with more repetition. Do more repetitions and talk less. It's better than all the explaining that you can do and yet allowing the student to do repetition. A little different if you're teaching a private lesson. Private lessons, you can do a lot of talking and less repetition. The group classes, get reps in there. A lot of them. They need it. We've got about 15 more minutes and we'll take a break. We're going to talk now about forms, the body and mind responsibility. We're going to talk more about techniques and we're going to talk about sparring. Let's see which one of those I can get into for 15 minutes. I'll tell you what. Before I do that, I want to go down, I want to bring up some things on philosophy. Because many of you, we keep talking about, we're going to be talking more about the philosophy of what we do and less about the applications. You say, okay, what is philosophy? It's hard to say, this is philosophy. I'm going to teach you some philosophy now. But it's easy to say, this is our philosophy, all right? So what our philosophy is and what philosophy is two different things. So I want you guys to really become in close kinship to what our philosophy are. What are the things that we stand for when we're teaching? One of our biggest philosophies is our understanding of the body and the mind and what roles they play. As I mentioned to you last week, a soma, even though the Latin word means, or the Latin overlapping of the words means within the body, a soma still means this particular style. But yet within the body is a term that philosophically is part of the basis for our philosophy. In that we believe that it is not the mind that always controls the body. The mind teaches the body rather than controls it. Once the mind has taught the body, then the body must accept responsibility for its own actions, and the mind can be free. That is part of our philosophy. It's one of our major philosophies, and that's what we're working toward. It's pretty much the same thing as muscle memory. But it's our philosophy. Pulls. Our thoughts on pulls is part of our philosophy. How we relate the mind to the pulls for the body. Slow sparring. We're going to go over that in sparring. That's one of our philosophies. One of our philosophies. The empty mind and empty eyes is part of our philosophy. Being able to get the mind free of thought, be able to get the eyes free of sight, so that they're not focusing on one thing. So that when somebody does something, it's not a distraction because you look at it. So that when someone does something, it's not a distraction because you think about it. He who thinks in combat loses. He who thinks in practice wins. So even that rule, you see, has its flip-flop. You don't want to think when you're fighting, but you've got to think when you're practicing. See? Part of your practice is going to have to be learning not to think. So the clearing of the mind and the clearing of the eyes is part of our philosophy. You want to have a blank slate, blank mind, blank eyes. See nothing, hear nothing, be nothing, except one with your opponent. Even the concept of slow sparring in the very beginning teaches the underlying philosophy of becoming one with your opponent, in that you do nothing except match him. You be one with him. Whatever his tempo is, you match. Okay? Next thing, matching tempo. As I said before, matching tempo is defensive. You're matching in the defensive mode. You mismatch tempo in offense. Part of our philosophy. Part of what we do in a soma is based on the fact that we train to match tempo. Why? We do that so that we can be very good at defense. No matter what somebody does, we can match it. If you can match their tempo, you can block anything. And you'll notice most of our guys are really good at blocking. As you get higher up in the ranks, much of what you're trying to do on defense is learning to match tempos that are sporadic. See, it's very easy. We play it really easy in the beginning with the slow sparring, in that we have the tempo staying constant. Remember, that's one of the rules of the slow sparring. The tempo must remain the same. It's a constant, smooth tempo. You don't stick with that. At green sash, you're still not doing everything at slow, constant tempo, or even fast, constant tempo. And constant tempo is what's got to get out. You've got to start changing the tempo and being able to match the tempo of an inconsistent rhythm. But it's still matching tempo. and still defensive. Mismatching tempo and offensive, same thing. How can you change your tempo in such a way that he has no way of matching it? It's a game. Because he's trying his best to learn how to match your tempo, especially when it's syncopated. And you're doing your best to syncopate your tempo in such a way that he can't match it. That's where you start your progress. So those are still two more aspects of our philosophy. Exaggerate your moves for refinement. We talked about going over those things in the beginning. You want to make large circles. First block looks like this, not like this. I think a lot of people have been teaching like this lately. Yeah. Need to be up here. You're not by yourself, by any means. Scoop, pull. Nice long circle. In a sparring situation, you'll be there in a heartbeat. You wouldn't go way down here. You may even just go right to there. Minimize for application, as we've already mentioned. Another philosophy. Those two go together. You see a lot of the yin and the yang here again. It's not specific all the time, you know. You don't always minimize for application. You don't always maximize for refinement. That's basically the philosophy. Our philosophy on attitudes that we talked about in conjunction with the tape that I've given you is part of our philosophy. It's part of what we do that makes us all know what it is. The philosophy of understanding, for example, that there is something called trying too hard. What it looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like. So that you can see it in people. Know when they're trying too hard and give them the answers that they need so that they can understand how to become better rather than keep pushing themselves down further and further, because they will. Part of our philosophy is knowing and understanding how to turn people around on their attitudes. Knowing that the amount of importance that you put on an outcome of a certain circumstance is directly proportional to your ability to accomplish that task. That is a philosophy. It's part of what we do. Allies. Our allies. That's part of our philosophy. We've already spoke a lot about those. Our focal points with attacks and blocks. That's part of our philosophy. That you are blocking a focal point. That you're attacking a focal point. That you don't hit a person. Bruce Lee even said that when somebody attacks him, he does not hit them back. In his defense, all he is doing is what he was trained to do. Therefore, he's not responsible. So, to some degree, it's the same thing. He automatically blocks and punches that spot that he's trained to punch all the time. Their body just happens to be in the way. See? The philosophy of the focal point has a lot to do with understanding how to get that fist or that attack, reach that focal point in such a way that it's impersonal. You see? Impersonal. You're not hitting the person. You're hitting that spot, and they just happen to be in the way. Sounds, part of our philosophy, is that we do things based on how they sound. That's part of its own philosophy. Being able to hear the sound of one hand clap. Visualization. Our visualization skill is part of our philosophy. It's something that we put importance on. Being able to see something so that you can mimic it. Does anybody have anything else that they can think of that maybe ought to be added to this list? I know it's not all inclusive.
Well, along with changing tempo, we also treat distances about the same. As we do tempo, whenever you're defensive, you're trying to match distances, you're trying to keep a constant distance. Whenever you go to offensive, you try to mismatch the distances, change the distances.
Matching. And defense. Mismatching and offense.
I would almost add to your beginning that the body has a memory and that the mind trains the body. That once the mind's trained the body almost can train the mind at that point in time. Because it teaches you things like when you're off balance, go ahead and fall. A lot of times you can do yourself more damage trying to stay up than just falling down and taking whatever fall comes to you. It'll teach you that your opponent's a lot more dangerous than the fall is. But whenever you have your focus here, if you feel yourself falling, let it happen. There's a lot of things that our body teaches, our minds and our emotions, that we just learn from sparring, forms, techniques.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about that sometime.
Okay.
My first thought is that there are some things, just like breathing, digestion, that are very natural parts that we have no control, real conscious control of. And I would say that your ability to keep yourself from falling or falling falls into the category of natural occurring phenomena. Maybe not. That's why I said I'd like to talk to you.
Well, you look at how many people have twisted ankles playing basketball.
Oh, I agree with you, but you would hurt yourself more. I don't know that
And
you could actually train your
then look
mind.
at martial artists who,
Yeah.
if I come down on my ankle, I just fall. Because I have no fear of falling. I think that's one of the things that our body teaches us, is that the fall doesn't hurt as much as the consequences of trying to stay up.
I agree with that.
But it's not something that's intuitively obvious.
Right. Well, that's good. Anything else? How about you guys? All right, let's take about 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll come back and finish up talking about forms, techniques, and sparring. Okay?